Hello and welcome to The Independent. I'm John Rentoul. I'm hoping to be joined shortly by Lizzy Buchan, my parliamentary colleague. It's her swan song at The Independent because she is leaving us tragically. But we hope she will be joining us to discuss Prime Minister's questions.
Hi, John.
Hello, Lizzy. Welcome to your last hurrah.
Oh, no.
How sorry we are to see you go, but congratulations on your job.
I'm not leaving just because I don't want to do any more of these videos, I promise.
Well, it was a fascinating Prime Minister's questions, I thought. I thought Keir Starmer got the tone wrong. I thought he was much too hostile and aggressive. I thought he accused the Prime Minister of being blind to the risks, which I thought was unfair. I thought he was, again, unfair in making the analogy with the time when the Prime Minister said he must level with the British people. And he said, we know what happened next. I thought that was tasteless. What about you?
It was tough. He went in quite hard on the stuff around the lockdown in Leicester, which was obviously, has been quite a sort of challenging situation for the government. I think he was right to be robust on that because, local authority leaders have been saying for quite a long time that the government hasn't been communicating effectively with them around the kind of risks in local areas. I mean, we saw there was a long period where local authorities were asking for regional R rates, the kind of rate of infection, and were told that they could only be given national figures. And then there was this sort of point where Matt Hancock, during one of the press conferences, announced sort of almost flippantly that there were sort of local outbreaks that local authority leaders were not really across and that the MPs in those areas didn't know about. So there was I think that Keir Starmer was right to press the Prime Minister on that. I think on your point on the beaches, I mean, he made a point about the Prime Minister saying the previous week that people needed to kind of get back out there, go to the beach, it's fine, that sort of thing. And then obviously we saw the pictures from Bournemouth where there were huge numbers of people. I think maybe Keir Starmer was being quite sort of tough on that, and that perhaps maybe the government couldn't have prepared for the fact that after 100 days in lockdown and good weather that people might want to go to the beach. I mean, that's a question for the government on how they communicate the easing of lockdown, really.
It was that phrase that Boris Johnson used to Peter Kyle, the Brighton MP. He said, show some guts and welcome people to seaside resorts. And Keir Starmer described that as flippant. And I suppose that is fair enough. And the Prime Minister then tried to blame irresponsible people for not observing the rules, which, as you say, is a bit much after they've been locked down for 100 days.
And also that the communication around the easing of lockdown has been quite confusing. I think I often find when friends and family who are not sort of involved in this world will often come to me and say, but what actually are the rules? As if, they're struggling to kind of understand whether, can you go to somebody's house? Can you go inside? Can you do this? Can you do that? Can you go to the beach? Is it okay to travel? I think the government did lose control of the message. And so Starmer, I think, is right to, hold the PM to account on that.
Oh, yes, no, absolutely. And he's right also to press him on the question of jobs, because, I mean, that was what he then moved on to and said, and that's what he was making the comparison with. He said, basically, you warned us that lots of people were going to die, and they did. And then in your speech in Dudley, you said that, a lot of those jobs are not going to come back. And, obviously they're not. And that is going to be the next big political battleground, isn't it? I mean, because he was... Boris Johnson was trying to say, well, look, we've preserved jobs with the furlough scheme, but Labour's already wanting to move the argument beyond that onto what happens next.
Yeah, you had, I think one of the first times anyway that Labour has called for an extension to the furlough scheme, because obviously we're now shifting towards the point where employers are going to have to start contributing more towards the scheme. And I mean, the Prime Minister did sort of allude to this in his speech in Dudley yesterday, where he used a lot of metaphors, so I might be muddling it up, but I'm pretty sure he sort of said, we're waiting between like the lightning and the thunderclap
He
of
did, yeah.
coronavirus, and that it does very much feel like we're in this kind of waiting zone where obviously the support is starting to wind up, and it's about to become very clear what the true economic impact of the pandemic is going to be, because we're already hearing stories about employers who've had people on furlough who are just planning to make mass redundancies as soon as the support dries up. And I mean, Starmer himself referred to huge job losses at companies such as Airbus, EasyJet and TM Lewin only yesterday. So I think the government are very worried about this, but obviously they are also trying to weigh up what the bill would be for them to continue the furlough scheme and whether it's feasible or not. So I think, you're right to say that this is going to be a big battleground, because I don't think we've necessarily seen anything yet in terms of what the economic hit is going to be.
No, that's right. I mean, it's not reassuring for the Prime Minister to describe it as that pause between the lightning and the thunderclap. Because he's encapsulating the national mood, which is that we all know that something dreadful is going to happen, and we're sort of looking to the government to protect us from the effects, and that's what Keir Starmer was on about. Although as I say, I think he got the tone wrong. Although I think he's absolutely right to go on that question. But then, the Prime Minister then just came back with some prepared sound bites of a rather base political nature, calling on Starmer to stop equivocating and support the ending of the lockdown and support getting kids back in school. I wish he'd stop calling them kids.
Yeah, he said, we're the builders, they're the blockers, we're the doers, they're the ditherers, or whatever. So you get this kind of big conflict between not only Labour and Tory ideology, but also between Starmer and the PM as people, which is that, Starmer is much more cautious, whereas the Prime Minister is clearly desperate to start, injecting optimism, as he would say, I suppose. You saw it yesterday in the speech. They're clearly trying to reset the narrative from sort of crisis towards recovery, which some people might say is a bit premature. But he's clearly trying to, get a bit of energy towards the rebuilding of the country and to try and boost the public mood a bit. But Starmer obviously is right to raise the fact that there are still so many outstanding issues before we could even begin to be optimistic, especially considering that there's still a high infection rate, still people are dying, and there's every chance of a second wave. So I think you're going to consistently see them coming up against each other in how they want to kind of progress through this next phase.
Yeah, and there's a real contest going on there between, as you say, the doers and the ditherers, because Keir Starmer started. I mean, I think his first question was, why has the response to Leicester been so slow? Keir Starmer's whole attack has been consistently for weeks now that the government has been too slow to respond. It's always been behind the curve, and that's what a lot of public opinion believes. And I think you're right. Boris Johnson wants to get ahead of that by being extremely bouncy and forward-looking, and trying to get onto the front foot and say that we're doing things. But as things go on getting worse on the economic front, that's going to be very difficult to maintain.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's been huge sort of public support for the government in terms of kind of just doing what needs to be done in an unprecedented situation. I think a lot of people understand that this has been immensely challenging, but you've seen over the last, the last few weeks and months that that's starting to fade. And, the opinion polls at the weekend, or was it that, for the first time, I think one of the polls in the Observer said that the public preferred Keir Starmer as Prime Minister to Boris Johnson. So, things are, I think, Number 10 are very aware of the fact that public support is on the wane, and they need to be seen to be in the driving seat on that. I think we're also going to get more from Rishi Sunak next week, which means that, the PM yesterday was saying that he can't give any more detail yet, we have to wait. But I think they're clearly trying to kind of regain a bit of momentum. But, the best laid plans, who knows where, the summer will take us, because obviously we've got the big lifting of lockdown on Saturday, with the kind of reopening of pubs, all of this sort of thing. It's going to, if there is going to be a big spike in kind of infection rates because people are out in the community more, then we're probably going to start to see that, before long.
Absolutely. It is incredibly difficult. The other issue that came up a couple of times in PMQs, related to the jobs and unemployment issue, is benefits and the fact that they're reintroducing conditionality for universal credit as of today. I think 1st of July. That was raised by Ian Blackford for the SNP and Stephen Timms who's the chair of the DWP Select Committee, and he wanted the government to increase other benefits as well as universal credit, and the Prime Minister, I'm afraid, was having nothing to do with it.
Well, I think, again, this is another kind of flashpoint that we're going to see once the economic hit becomes clearer as well, because when you get lots of people moving on to unemployment, then we're expecting to see an increase. There's already been a huge increase in the number of people claiming universal credit during lockdown. And, they're clearly preparing for the fact that that may increase further as the year goes on. So again, benefits is going to be consistently something that is going to be at the forefront of the government's mind. And something that they really need to be taking into account, because obviously if the government, this particular administration is in power with a massive majority because they were able to win seats in traditional Labour areas in, the so-called Red Wall. So they're trying to hold on to a different kind of voter than they have in the past, and some of these people may be on universal credit, may have lost their jobs, all of that sort of thing, who may not have been the traditional Tory voter. And so if the PM sticks to his, promise that he is going to try and I think he originally referred to them as, they'd lent him their vote. And that he was going to kind of hold on to it by proving to them that voting Conservative was good for them and better than voting for Labour. So, there's a political element to this as well as the kind of economic element of just kind of trying to ensure that the benefits, the welfare system is working for the public.
Yeah, absolutely. The other issue that was bound to come up was raised by a Tory backbencher, was Hong Kong. But the Prime Minister didn't really say anything much about that. He said it's the new security law in Hong Kong is a clear and serious breach of the joint agreement between the British government and the Chinese government. But he didn't actually suggest what the British government's going to do about it.
No, I think he was Dominic Raab, the Foreign Secretary, is probably, as we are speaking, addressing the Commons on this. So I think the PM probably was trying not to, spike his announcement too much. But he did say that they were sort of looking at providing a path to citizenship for Hong Kongers. So it's clearly
though, to be fair.
So he has kind of mentioned that sort of thing before, and they didn't really set out a great deal of detail. But I imagine we'll get some more shortly. But this is again a big, the future relationship with China is a continuing sort of issue for the Prime Minister on a number of levels, particularly because, you know, there's the whole issue with Huawei and the 5G, which is sort of supposed to be building parts of the UK's 5G network, which is now subject to a major backlash by Tory MPs, who some of whom seem to be growing quite sort of critical on China.
Oh yeah, I mean, before the coronavirus hit, that was the big sort of growing rebellion of the Conservative Party, wasn't it?
Absolutely, and that's only, you know, the coronavirus pandemic has only served to deepen those tensions. So that is obviously something that is going to be really difficult. And now the British government's in a difficult position over Hong Kong as well, because clearly it feels a significant responsibility to, you know, the citizens of Hong Kong, and also that China is behaving in a sort of more and more aggressive way. And so I think this is going to be a really interesting sort of non-coronavirus issue to watch play out. And yeah, it will be interesting to see kind of which way the Prime Minister goes on it, and also what direction, you know, the criticism comes from, who in his party thinks that that's the right, you know, that he's doing the right thing, and who doesn't. Because as we've said before, you know, an 80 strong majority looked pretty good in December, but it's not looking as good now.
No, absolutely. Well, brilliant. Thank you very much, Lizzy, for joining us, and thanks for your last review of Prime Minister's Questions, and best of luck in your new job.
Thanks very much. Bye.
Brilliant. See you later.